The Labor Movement, Chapter 5, Section 4, Part 1. The relationship between employers and employees in the late 19th and early 20th century was characterized by exploitation. Women working as seamstresses averaged 12-hour workdays, 6 days a week. Steel mill workers worked for 7 days a week with no vacation, no sick time, no unemployment insurance, and no vacation. The railroads were some of the most dangerous places to work, with 1 in 300 workers being killed on the job. In general, factories and workplaces were poorly ventilated, poorly lit, and extremely dangerous places to be. Women and children joined the workforce en masse in the late 1800s. In 1890, there were 4 million women in the workforce. By 1920, there were more than 8 million. On average, children earned 27 cents a day, men made $498 per year, and women made $269 per year. With a combined income, these men and women would barely be above the poverty line by today's standards. Overproduction in the manufacturing sector caused deflation. This is when the value of the dollar increases. $1 can buy more products, which initially seems like a good thing, but it resulted in employers cutting the wages of their workers. Workers had no power to fight these wage cuts, and so they began to unionize. Unions are organizations created to protect and fight for workers in a particular industry. There were two basic types of unions. The trade union, which was made up of skilled workers who were good at a certain task, like carpenters, iron welders, plumbers, so on and so forth. These workers had much more power than the common laborers because they had a trade which others did not have. The other type of union was an industrial union. In industrial unions, all workers within a given industry would be represented. So common laborers and skilled workers in an industry would be represented by this union. The owners of factories were staunchly anti-union because unions would cause them to lose some of their profits. Oftentimes they would refuse to negotiate with strikers. They also forbade union meetings and fired anyone they found to be a member of a union. Other anti-union actions that bosses took were yellow dog contracts. Workers would have to sign these, promising that they would never join a union or go on strike before they would be hired. Workers who were part of unions were often put on a blacklist, so they were unable to find jobs anywhere. Employers would also stage lockouts, wherein if there were a labor union, they would lock out all the employees and not allow them to work. Employers would often hire replacement workers, known as scabs. These workers would cross the picket lines and go to work in the factories where union members were on strike. Obviously, there was a great deal of turmoil between the union members and the scabs. This often led to violence between the two groups. The first large-scale national union was known as the National Labor Union. It was formed by William H. Silvis, who was an iron worker. Eventually, there would be more than 640,000 members in 300 local unions in 13 states. Silvis was ahead of his time and wanted to include African Americans and women in his union, but he was blocked by the locals. This union was very influential, and they forced the government to legalize an 8-hour workday for government workers. They eventually formed a political party known as the Labor Reform Party and ran a candidate for president in 1872. The Knights of Labor was formed 2 years later in 1868. This was an industrial union with membership open to everyone. They advocated for the 8-hour workday. They saw strikes as a last resort and advocated arbitration. This is where a third party would come in to help work out disagreements between the management and the employees. In 1881, Terence Powderly, a mechanic from Scranton, Pennsylvania, took over the union. In 1880, there were 28,000 members. By 1886, there were 700,000. Another form of union was the craft union. The first craft union was created by Samuel Gompers. Craft unions included skilled workers, but from many industries. The American Federation of Labor, created in 1886, was an example of this type of union. They used collective bargaining, in other words, group negotiations. They also used strikes as a major tactic. This resulted in higher wages and shorter work weeks for skilled workers. Gompers pushed for closed shops. These are workplaces where everyone in the workplace had to be a member of the union. Eugene Debs was a huge proponent of industrial unionism. In industrial unionism, All workers in one industry, skilled and unskilled, form a union. This allowed common laborers to benefit from the power of the skilled workers. These unions excluded African Americans and women and saw some small successes. Socialism is an economic and political system based on government control of business and property and equal distribution of wealth. In a socialist system, the government would regulate industry and ensure that workers were given their share. The IWW, or Industrial Workers of the World, was headed by William Big Bill Haywood. This was primarily a Western union and was composed mainly of miners, lumberjacks, cannery workers, and dock workers. The IWW was a very democratic union. They included women and African Americans. They were widely considered to be socialists and are often seen as radicals. Their support of a socialist government led many Americans to believe that they were actually communist. This was used against the unions, as the managers would often paint the unions as communist sympathizers who wanted to overthrow the government. This resulted in a decline in union membership.